happening, everybody? It's Sean with Reactions to the Classics. Today we got a reaction to Chicago and their album Chicago 5, brought to us by our friend, longtime supporter and patron of the channel, Trucker Kev. Thank you, Trucker Kev. Appreciate you. Appreciate all the patrons that make this thing go. If you'd like to support us in any way, check out the Patreon link below or the patron link on the end screen. Okay, there's not much Chicago up on the channel. We did a Chicago top 10. We looked it up, Trey and I did. It was a couple years ago. It seems like it was 10 years ago because we have over 2,000 videos up. A lot of videos have come between now and then. I don't really even remember any of it. I just remember when I was doing the research for a couple of these songs, I'm like, oh yeah, I think we did those on the top 10. So I haven't heard this album, and really if I've heard any of these songs, I've heard them once or twice. Before we jump into the album itself, Trucker Kev has some thoughts on this. He knows a lot about music, so always interested to see what he has to say. He said, amongst all the great covers, we call this the paneling cover. All of Chicago's albums had a unique theme where they would have something with the logo surrounding it, whether it would be leather, money. This had classic wood paneling that you find in your basement back in the 60s and 70s. And I had a basement that way, and I actually had a room in the 80s that way too. I mean, I didn't love it, but it was what it was, right? Now establishing themselves as a serious jazz rock horn band with a heavy following by this time, beginning in 1968 and 69, with the Chicago Transit Authority, changing their name and shortened to Chicago, with number 2 followed by number 3. All double albums. Talk about having some balls right there. They just went for it. That's crazy, right? All you've released are double albums. And a multi-album release live album at Carnegie Hall. This would be the first of 2 that would be single albums, and then another double album would appear in 1974 with number 7. The interesting things about this album are it had one monster hit in Saturday in the Park. It also had an FM radio hit known as Dialogues Part 1 and 2. I like it best when it's segued together like a lot of real rock stations will do, and that's what we'll do when we get to it. Yeah, this album features not only just great playing, it's got the triple vocals of Robert Wham, keyboardist. Peter Cetera, yes, that Peter Cetera, believe it or not, of the 80s mellow rocking soundtracks, like you're the inspiration, right? He played one hell of a bass back in the day, and of course the lead guitar work of the late, great Terry Kath, who was sometimes known as the White Ray Charles for a soulful baritone. Coupled with the great horn arrangements by Jimmy Pankow and all the Chicago players, Wally Terry and Lee and Jimmy, of course. And then keeping time on the kit, the great underrated Danny Serafin. So great background from Kev. I found some more stuff as we talk about. It's their 4th studio album released on July 10th, 1972. Notable for being the group's first single album released. Following the release of Chicago 3 in 1971, the group changed from producing double albums with many songs arranged in extended suites in favor of more concise tracks on a single album. It's often considered the group's return to basics. It is a sound resembling their first album, Chicago Transit Authority. Chicago 5 is also notable for Robert Williams' prolific songwriting. 7 of its 9 tunes are composed solely by him. Terry Kath wrote and sang the album's final track, Alma Mater, which showcased his acoustic guitar abilities. This would be the last album not to have any compositions from the previously mentioned Peter Cetera during his tenure in the band. Recorded just before Chicago at Carnegie Hall was released in late 1971, Chicago 5 was cut in just over a week and held for release until the following summer. Chicago 5 was critically acclaimed and became Chicago's first #1 album, spending 9 weeks atop the charts in the US, which is crazy back in the album era. Went to 24 in the UK. So before we get into this video, the music will not be in here, but it'll be at a Vimeo link below. So I highly suggest you follow along with us. Thanks again, Trucker Kev. We're going to jump into the first track. You see it below, a hit by Varice, written by Robert Wham, sung by Robert Wham. I'll give you the writer and the singer on each one. Kev says the album starts off with a very unique fan favorite, a hit called Varice. It's about Edgar Varice, sometimes known as the father of electronic music. So I did a little digging on him. He only has 3 hours of music that still exists that's recorded. He's so influential. Zappa idolized him, called his house one time, actually, back when we had the phone book and you could actually get a hold of somebody, and talked to Varice's wife, but didn't actually talk to Varice. But Varice sent him a letter. Frank Zappa thought so much of that letter, he framed it and hung it in his studio for the rest of his life. So just an interesting thing of a guy I'd never heard of before. I'm going to have the lyrics up as always. Let's get after it. All right, a hit by Varice. What musicianship, right? It's really about the interplay in the horns. It's interplay in all of it, but the horns and the drums as much as anything, right? The guitar works nice too, but it's really about that. The lyrics, they don't even really matter, and I have a feeling that's going to be the way it is on a lot of these songs. Not all of them, because it doesn't matter, right? You're not always going for lyrics, right? So the drums by Danny Serafin were really good, and obviously the star was the brass, the trumpet. We got Wee Laughlin on that. Trombone, James Pankow. Brass arranger, James was arranging all of that. So all kinds of people on percussion, like lots and lots of just rich instrumental stuff going on here, right? And lots of runs at the start, in the middle, at the end, just all over this song. So like I said, it's rare when I enjoy a song where the lyrics take a back seat to the musicianship, but this one I quite enjoyed. Next up, we have All Is Well, written by Robert Lamb, sung by Robert Lamb. Kev says, and then comes the just got good, solid rock and roll with jazz-infused arrangements, which really surprised many on this album. The songwriting is amazing. You also have fantastic blending, such as on this track. It starts off as what you would think could be a classic 70s ballad, and then it turns and grooves and it brings it all back in again, which is one of the magical things about the Great Chicago prior to the death of Terry Kath, in Kev's opinion. All right, All Is Well. Just a great build there, right? The tri-harmonies on this one are absolutely fantastic, with obviously Robert on here, and we got Terry and Peter in there, and Lee actually comes in some too, so there might be some quad harmonies on there. So the lyrics are fine, you know, all is well. I think I'm going to be all right, and I'm feeling better again. Loving you was sad, affairs of timing that were bad, and the laughing ended again. And in the chorus, there was a time when I thought I was fooling myself, but now I'll take a bow because I'm free and easy. So, yeah, man, all is fine. Don't worry about me. But, you know, the horns and those harmonies, man, are the stars here for me. And once again, you know, just I'll champion the horn guys. You got Lee on the trumpet, James on the trombone, and then Walter, the main guy, on the percussion there, and also Lee on the a little bit on there too, and then Danny on the drums, a little bit in the background on this one, but needed. So yeah, really good tune. Next up, I don't have anything on this song, man. Now That You've Gone, we got James Pankow as the writer and Terry Kath as the singer. Now That You've Gone, I will tell you, man, this is the one where everybody was just all in, right? I like Terry's vocals. Definitely on the harmonized, the other verses, you could hear Satira, right? He was coming over everybody else. You know, you could definitely hear that familiar voice from me because I know the older Chicago stuff very well, having been a child of the 80s, basically. But the drumming at the start, Danny just running it, man, for like those first 45 seconds. Throughout, he came back in, and then the horns just shined. I mean, the essence of the song is she's gone, he can't get over it, and can't figure out why did you leave me, man? You're going to regret it someday. But the horns, and especially the ending, I thought the trumpet, especially with Lee Laughlin, was absolutely tremendous, but all of it was tremendous. Now we get to dialogue part one. We're going to run part one and part two together, as Kev mentioned that he liked in the opening in his comments. And this is the song that when I did the research on, I'm like, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember the research. I don't remember the song, right? That's kind of how it works. But both of these are written by Lamb, and both the vocals are by Kath and Peter Satira. Kev says, this is interesting. It's from the eyes of Peter Satira, talking about a college student at the time, speaking a little bit out against the war, which they did quite a bit. Not really writing protest songs, but having songs that if you read further into were about protesting the Vietnam War. It's one of those great ones that if you become a fan of Chicago, you will hear the call and response between Terry and Peter quite often. That's a great piece of music. Terry lays down some fantastic wall pedal. I found an edited version, which we're not going to do, of course, was released as a single in October of '72, originally reaching number 24 in the U.S. In part one, the song's lyrics are a dialogue between two young people with different views. The first person, whose lines are sung by Terry, is very concerned about events of the early 70s, such as Vietnam War, starvation, and, quote, repression closing in around. The second person, whose lines are sung by Peter Satira, maintains that, quote, everything is fine. The dialogue between the two people is also reflected musically, with Kath's guitar and Satira's bass feeding off each other. As part one comes to a close, Terry's character thanks the other character for the talk, saying, you really eased my mind. I was troubled by the shapes of things to come. Peter's character responses of gratitude for the eye-opener. Well, if you had my outlook, your feelings would be numb. You'd always think that everything was fine. With the two characters acknowledging the other's position, we move to part two, where more positive lyrics such as we can make it better, we can change the world now, and we can save the children are sung by the whole band. In the finale, the music fades away with the band singing a cappella, the optimistic appeal, we can make it happen. Wow, man. And this ends out side one, too, as well. Parts one and two. We're going to roll them. Let's get it. All right, dialogues part one and two definitely need to be played together. Pretty hard to react to this, right? Because there's so much going on. It's almost like you don't need to say anything. But obviously, the musicianship, I thought Terry really crushed the guitar on this. All the other stuff, my broken record, the horns, I did like Satira's bass work. The harmonies on the second part were so fantastic. And, the upbeat, we can make it happen. We can make it better. We can change the world now. We can save the children. And so I thought the harmonies, and you heard in the acapella the last like 10 seconds of just how fantastic they are there. Now I'll rewind to part one, because the lyrics are very interesting in the fact that, it strikes me that Terry's kind of a real world guy. Are you optimistic about the way things are going? Peter's, no, I never think of it at all. Because Peter's on a college campus, is doing his thing. He's educated. Not that there's anything wrong with being educated, right? I have several degrees. It doesn't matter. I don't use any of them. But there's nothing wrong with that. And I've never had my head in the sand. I've been in some pretty difficult situations. I've seen some things. But sometimes you can get you're in your own little world. And Terry's like, don't you ever worry what you see what's going down? And Peter's like, well, I try to mind my own business. And there's no business at all. And Terry said, when it's time to function as a feeling human being, will your Bachelor of Arts help you get by? Peter's like, I hope to study further a few more years or so. I also hope to keep a steady high. So he's smoking weed. He's going to college. He's not worrying about anything. Will you try to change things? Use the power you have, the power of a million new ideas, Terry says. And then Peter's like, no, everything's fine. You feel the repression as it's closing in around, Terry says. And Peter says, no, the campus here is very, very free. It doesn't make you angry the way the war is dragging on? Well, I hope the president knows what he's into. I don't know. Oh, I just don't know. And then he's, goes into starvation and all these other things. And Peter's like, I don't see that, because, so I tell you all of that because I think it tells this great story that was relevant in the early 70s, and it's relevant in 2023 when I'm filming this video, is that people stick their head in the sand and they don't want to put themselves in other people's shoes, right? Everything's fine here. So either I don't know what's going on in the rest of the world, or more likely, I don't care. And I'm going to pretend like it's not going on. I might even fool myself. But it's weird. I'm 51 years old, and it's like, you're told you can change the world. The older I get, I think you can't really change anything. But then that's really a negative way to look at it. And if enough people band together, you can get things changed. It's just frustrating. And, right now, I live in the United States, and right now in this country, we're so divided, and the division's going to get even worse as the presidential election comes. And I'm definitely on one side of that division, although not all the way. Like, I don't all the way agree with that side. But, there's been so much misinformation thrown out by the other side, and so many lies that people bought into. And if you can't figure out what side of that I'm on, you might not watch the channel. I mean, I'm trying not to get into politics too much. It's about music, but it's not the color of this, right, that I'm on. So just so you know, but I don't agree with both sides on everything. But it's just interesting that, 50 years ago, they're having this discussion and nothing's changed. So I thought it was great songwriting, fantastic musicianship, great way to finish off side one. Now we'll go to side two. We got While the City Sleeps, written by Robert, sung by Robert. Kev says you got Bob's hard-hitting horn, driven heavy, cool on this one. While the City Sleeps, kind of like a couple other songs in here. It's got everything in, right? It's got the horns. It's got the great tri-harmonies, maybe quad harmonies on there. And maybe it's just Peter and him. I don't know. But, and it also has some funkiness that rolls in there some. So, yeah, I mean, the instrumentation, once again, it's a broken record, but fantastic on here. The way they structure almost all of these songs is, you kind of have an instrumentation run up, then you have some lyrics. There's not a lot of lyrics on most of these songs, but they make them work, right? Instrumentation, bang out one or two verses, more instrumentation, closing out with the final verse, and then the coda with some great instrumentation. So that kind of went with that theme. Now we'll get to the song, 80 million streams on Spotify that everybody knows. I mean, I know this song, but I don't know it well, right? I didn't grow up. I didn't listen to classic rock radio, right? This is way before my time. But we got Lamb writing it, Lamb and Satira singing it, Saturday in the Park. Very successful upon release, reaching number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, became the band's highest charting single at the time. Billboard ranked as the 76th song chart-wise from 1972. Single was certified gold, sold over 1 million copies. All those are a big deal. According to fellow Chicago members Walter Parazater, Lamb was inspired to write the song during the recording of Chicago 3 in New York City on Saturday, July 4th, 1970. Walter said, Robert came back to the hotel from Central Park very excited after seeing the steel drum players, singers, dancers, and jugglers. I said, man, it's time to put this to music. However, Robert told Billboard magazine a little differently. He said, it was written as I was looking at footage from a film I shot in Central Park over a couple of years, back in the early 70s. I shot this film, and somewhere down the line, I edited it into some kind of a narrative. And as I watched the film, I jotted down some ideas based on what I was seeing and had experienced. And it was really kind of that peace and love thing that happened in Central Park and in many parks all over the world, perhaps on a Saturday where people just relax and enjoy each other's presence and the activities we observe and the feelings we get from feeling a part of a day like that. So Robert's on lead vocals and electric piano here, and of course bass and lead vocals / chorus for Peter here. Terry's on the rhythm, James Panko's on trombone, Walter's on alto sax, and Danny, of course, is playing his great drums. Saturday in the Park, just so well done, right? Robert and Peter, and you just say, like, lyrically, it's fine. It's just take you through a day in the park. You can picture what you're going to see. I can picture a 1970s park and what I'm seeing all around me. But the horns, the way the horns come in and emphasize on the end of lines is a nice little trick to stick it in your head. The drumming is fantastic as well. And so are the keys. I mean, I would imagine Robert wrote this song originally on the electric piano, but great song. You can see why it's commercially successful. Very catchy, just well done. All right, next up we have State of the Union, written by Lamb, sung by Peter. A long 45-second outro on that bad boy. So listen to Peter Cetera get a little funky here. I mentioned during the reaction, the bass is fantastic on here, but the horns are great. It's almost like two songs in one, right? It's some lyrics and then almost a whole instrumental piece, and then we get back into the lyrics. Which the lyrics are pretty fire as well, right? He definitely is. He's definitely going after some things. I was talking about the State of the Union, how there's no one in power who's thinking of me. I was thinking how we ought to try to fix it, find a leader who's not afraid to be. Then a voice called out in the darkness saying, tear the system down. Oh, tear it down. I was thinking about how very crazy and tried to find a way to tell him so. But when I used a word that was quite nasty. How the policeman heard me. Man, I'll never know. And then we get in the chorus again. I was wrestled off to one side of the theater, and they said I'd have to go to jail. They don't permit coarse language in their city, but they did accept a large amount of bail. I mean, it's great, right? No, we're not going to do that. I mean, for a price, it's okay. We'll let you go. So fantastic horns. It's a musicianship. Interested in hearing Peter on this, and we're going to hear Peter on the next track as well, as we have Goodbye, also written by Lamb, and as I said, sung by Peter. Goodbye. First song on here that it's not a miss for me. I mean, they had a lot of interesting stuff on here. Some jazz influence. I think there were some congas on here. Some, obviously a little bit of funk in there, a little bit of Latin feel at points. So I get what they were doing here. So I mean, it's still, as all this stuff is, a fantastic showcase of musicianship. This is basically an instrumental with some lyrics thrown in, which isn't all bad. All right, we got one track left. I talked about it at the beginning. It's Alma Mater. Terry Kath wrote it. Terry Kath sings it. Let's finish this thing off. Alma Mater, a way different way to end this album, right, compared to the rest of the album. Kath sounds fantastic. His acoustic and obviously the fantastic keyboard playing of Robert Lamb were the highlights here. Kind of brings you in. Just a love story, right, of all this time we were trying to get married is what I'm guessing. We had all these goals, and now that we're married, we got to set new goals to make sure sort of that it doesn't stay stale, right? And we think we've accomplished our goal, because when that happens, everything just kind of dies out, whether it's a relationship or anything else. So I thought it was really well done. You could really feel that soulfulness that Kev talked about with Lamb at the start of this video. You could really feel that in this one. So that's going to take me to my favorite tracks. Honorable mention, we'll go with the last song, Alma Mater. We'll also go with the third song, Now That You've Gone. Phase, we'll go with the first one, A Hit by Verise. We'll also go with Saturday in the Park, Got To. And then my fave on here is the Dialogues Part 1 and 2. I'll consider them one song as a fave. Now, before I go to my overall score, let's see what Kev had to say. He said, this is yet another album where I don't have a favorite. I like every single tune. This is one of the Chicago albums I listen to still very often, and it's one that start to finish. I like when it starts, and I like when it ends. His final rating's a 9.25. I'm going to be a little lower than that, but I talk about this all the time, guys. The first time I ever heard this album. I'm going to be at an 8.5. The musicianship is as good as it's going to get, right? This is not really the kind of music I seek out, but I understand the greatness of it. It's just absolute greatness all the way across the line. From obviously, your keyboards with Lamb to your guitar with Kath to your bass with Satira to all the brass and woodwinds to Danny's drumming, like all of it is just fantastic. They very much are almost like a jazz band, who I consider jazz musicians the greatest musicians in the world, playing out some rock type music. So great choice by Kev. Let me know what you think of this one. What are your favorites down below? What else do I need to check out from Chicago? I know there's a very big division in fans from the stuff that I knew, which sounds totally different than this and is not nearly as musically accomplished, the 80s stuff. But they had bigger success. But chart success doesn't mean quality, boys and girls. Just keep that in mind. All right, guys, until next time, I will see you.